I am Charlotte, and I am 28 years old. 6 months ago, the people who were supposed to protect me committed an act of betrayal so profound, it permanently shattered my definition of family. I was standing in my parents' living room, asking for the college fund my grandmother explicitly left me. Instead of an answer, I got a confession. My mother looked at me with dead eyes and said, "We used the money for your sister's house." When I demanded answers, when I threatened a lawsuit to protect my inheritance, my father didn't apologize. He laughed. He looked me up and down and sneered, "With what money? Even a lawyer is out of your price range." They humiliated me, stripped me of my future, and threw me out. But there was one thing they didn't know. They didn't know I kept every receipt, and they had no idea that Uncle Arthur was waiting in the shadows, ready to fund a legal war they could never win. And right now? They are begging for mercy they will never receive. Before I tell you exactly how I destroyed their perfect little world, hit that like button if you believe that justice should always prevail over toxic family loyalty. And let me know in the comments where you are watching from today. Now, let's go back to the moment everything broke. It was a Tuesday evening when the illusion of my family finally collapsed. I had driven to my parents' house in the suburbs after a grueling day at work. I was preparing my applications for top-tier MBA programs. The application fees and tuition deposits were looming, and I needed to access the $120,000 trust fund my grandmother had left solely for my education. I brought it up over dinner, casually at first. I asked my father when we could go to the bank to handle the transfer. My father, Richard, shifted in his chair. He didn't look at me. He just waved a hand and mumbled, "Don't worry about it right now." My mother, Evelyn, quickly chimed in, her voice dripping with that fake, sugary tone she used at her country club meetings. "Just concentrate on your applications for the time being. We'll talk when the time comes." But I couldn't wait. The deadlines were weeks away. I pressed them. I told them I needed a definitive answer. That was when my mother set down her wine glass, looked me dead in the eye, and dropped the bomb with terrifying absolute casualty. "We used the MBA money for Beatrice," she said. "She is purchasing a home with Nathan." The room went completely silent. The blood drained from my face. I asked her to repeat herself, hoping the exhaustion was making me hear things. My father leaned forward, defensive and aggressive all at once. He told me Beatrice needed it right now. He said it wouldn't be fair for me to get a free ride when my older sister had struggled so much. I snapped. Years of repressed anger boiled over. I demanded to know how they could embezzle the specific funds my grandmother set aside for my schooling. It was illegal. I told them that. And what did they do? They laughed. My father literally threw his head back and chuckled. "With what money are you going to stop us?" he mocked, staring right through me. "Even a lawyer is out of your price range." My mother smiled tightly. "Don't be silly, Charlotte. This is a family matter. You'll figure it out. It's not as though you can't borrow money like everyone else." I realized in that exact second that they didn't just see me as an afterthought. To them, I wasn't a daughter. I was a resource to be harvested for Beatrice. If you've ever stood in a room and realized the people who gave you life are actively trying to ruin yours, you know the exact chill that ran down my spine. To understand the absolute audacity of what my parents did, you have to understand the toxic dynamic I grew up in. My sister, Beatrice, is 35 years old, and she has been the undisputed golden child of our family since the day I was born. Beatrice was the girl who could do no wrong, even when she was constantly doing wrong. She dropped out of college twice. She bounced from one meaningless pursuit to another, eventually landing a job as an administrator at a tiny private preschool. She and her fiancé, Nathan, barely made ends meet, constantly complaining about their rent and living beyond their means. Yet, to my parents, Beatrice was a fragile angel who just needed a little more help. "You are simply amazing with kids," they would coo at her, completely ignoring the fact that she was financially illiterate. Then there was me. The scapegoat. The invisible child. I spent my entire life trying to earn a fraction of the praise Beatrice received simply for breathing. When I graduated high school as valedictorian and won a massive science scholarship, my parents spent my entire graduation speech looking at their phones. Later that night, they threw a party, not for my graduation, but because Beatrice announced she might want to become a teacher. I learned very early on that I had to survive on my own. I worked late shifts in retail to pay for my own expenses. I took out modest student loans. I climbed the corporate ladder with raw grit, eventually becoming a senior project manager overseeing 15 employees and millions of dollars in accounts. I built a life I was proud of. My parents, meanwhile, were obsessed with keeping up appearances. My mother lived for her bridge club and her HOA meetings, while my father defined his entire self-worth by his golf handicap and the brand new Porsche sitting in their driveway. They loved looking rich, even if they were secretly stretched thin. The only person who ever truly saw me was my grandmother Eleanor. She was a woman of old money and traditional values. She valued hard work, smart investments, and most importantly, education. She lived a few states away, but her letters were my lifeline. Every birthday, every milestone, she sent a handwritten card with a modest check and a piece of wisdom. She knew exactly how my parents treated me, though she rarely spoke of it directly. She just made sure I knew I had worth. Grandma Eleanor was the only reason I didn't completely sever ties with my family in my early 20s. I kept holding out hope that maybe, if I just achieved a little more, my parents would look at me the way they looked at Beatrice. I was so incredibly wrong. Grandma Eleanor passed away 3 years ago after a brief but devastating illness. I spent her final days sitting by her hospital bed, holding her frail hand. The smell of antiseptic and fading lavender perfume is permanently burned into my memory. In one of her lucid moments, she squeezed my fingers with surprising strength. She looked at me, her eyes clear and piercing. "Education is the one thing nobody can ever take away from you, Charlotte," she whispered. "Remember that." I didn't fully understand the weight of those words until after the funeral. The reading of the will took place in a stuffy lawyer's office downtown. The distribution of assets seemed incredibly fair on the surface. My parents inherited her house and a bulk of her savings. Beatrice, naturally, was given all the family heirlooms and Grandma's extensive jewelry collection, valued at tens of thousands of dollars. And then came my portion. Grandma Eleanor had established a sizable trust fund, $120,000, expressly bequeathed for my MBA education. The legal language was ironclad. The money was to be utilized strictly for my schooling. Because I was already employed and hadn't yet applied to graduate school, my parents were assigned as the legal custodians to oversee the account until I required it. I sat in that leather chair, overwhelmed with gratitude. Grandma had secured my future. She had given me the ultimate shield against the world. But looking back, I should have paid closer attention to the warning signs right there in that office. When the lawyer read the amount designated for my education, my mother's jaw tightened. My father let out a quiet, almost dismissive sigh. In the weeks following the funeral, the grief was overshadowed by a sudden, intense focus on real estate. Beatrice and Nathan started leaving glossy brochures for high-end suburban homes on my parents' kitchen counter. Every Sunday dinner turned into a lamentation about how unfair the housing market was for millennials, and how they were just throwing money away on rent. My parents would nod empathetically. "You deserve a nice house, sweetheart," my dad would say to Beatrice, completely ignoring the fact that their combined income couldn't qualify for a mortgage on a shed. It's so hard for young people these days. I watched this dynamic play out, completely oblivious to the fact that they were already eyeing the money Grandma left me. I trusted them. They were my parents. I assumed that no matter how much they favored Beatrice, there were legal and moral lines they would never cross. The depth of my naivety still haunts me. Fast forward to the present. I had been strategically building my career for 6 years. I had reached a ceiling at my current company, and my boss, Mr. Sterling, made it clear that to move into the executive leadership tier, I needed a top-tier MBA. I spent months meticulously researching programs, studying for exams late into the night, and preparing my applications. It was the hardest I had ever worked. When the acceptance letters started rolling in, I was ecstatic. I had secured a spot at one of the most prestigious business schools in the country. It was the key to my future, a future where I would never have to worry about money or rely on anyone ever again. All I needed was the tuition deposit to secure my seat. That's when the dinner confrontation happened. The moment my mother casually stated, "We used the MBA money for Beatrice," the reality of my life fractured. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. Waiting for her to say it was a sick joke. But she just kept eating her salad. "You did what?" I choked out, my voice trembling. "Charlotte, don't be dramatic," my father interjected, cutting his steak. "Your sister needed a down payment. You have a great job. You can just take out student loans like everybody else. It's not the end of the world." The gaslighting was instantaneous and suffocating. They spoke to me as if I was a greedy, spoiled child throwing a tantrum over a toy, rather than an adult whose six-figure inheritance had just been stolen. "That money wasn't yours to give," I yelled, finally finding my voice. "Grandma left that for my education. It was in her will. What you did is embezzlement." My mother rolled her eyes. "Embezzlement? Listen to yourself. We are a family. We help each other. Beatrice couldn't get approved for the loan without a massive down payment. You were doing fine. It would have been incredibly selfish of you to sit on a pile of cash while your sister struggled." I felt physically sick. The nausea twisted in my stomach. I realized they had never viewed that money as mine. The moment Grandma Eleanor died, my parents looked at my trust fund and saw a piggy bank for their golden child. I had spent my entire life playing by the rules, working hard, asking for nothing, and the one time I was handed a lifeline, they ripped it away and handed it to the sister who had never worked hard for anything in her life. "I need that money for my tuition," I stated, my voice dropping to a dangerous, cold register. "I need it now. You are going to put it back." That was when my father gave me that cruel, mocking laugh. That was when he dared me to get a lawyer, knowing full well my savings were tied up in daily living expenses and I couldn't afford a massive legal retainer. They thought I was trapped. They thought I was powerless. I had never felt so violently betrayed in my entire life. The argument escalated into a screaming match, at least on my end. I demanded they show me the bank statements. I demanded they call Beatrice right then and there and explain the fraud. My father's face turned a violent shade of purple. The veins in his neck bulged. He slammed his fists down on the dining table, rattling the expensive china. "You will not come into my house and make demands," he roared. "You are an ungrateful, selfish brat. We gave you life. We raised you. And this is how you repay us? By threatening us over money? It's not your money." I screamed back, tears of pure rage burning my eyes. "Get out," my father bellowed, pointing a shaking finger at the front door. "If you are going to disrupt the peace of this family with your greed, you can get out of my house and stay out." My mother sat there, calmly sipping her Pinot Noir, watching me get evicted from my own family with a look of mild annoyance. She didn't say a word to defend me. She never did. I didn't cry. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. My hands were shaking, but my mind suddenly snapped into a terrifyingly clear state of focus. Survival mode. I reached into my coat pocket, my fingers brushing against my phone. I hit the record button on my voice memo app. "Just so we are clear," I said, my voice eerily calm over the ringing in my ears. "You took the $120,000 Grandma Eleanor left for my MBA, and you gave it to Beatrice to buy a house. And now you are kicking me out because I asked for it back." "You're damn right we did," my father sneered, his voice capturing perfectly on the recording. And there is absolutely nothing you can do about it. Now get off my property. I turned on my heel and walked out the front door. The cool night air hit my face like a physical blow. I walked down the driveway, pulling my small overnight bag behind me. Before I even reached the end of the block, I heard the roar of an engine. My parents' pristine Porsche Cayenne backed out of the driveway and sped past me. They were heading to Beatrice's new house. They were going to celebrate the home they bought with my stolen future. As the Porsche drove through a puddle, splashing dirty water onto my shoes, I made a silent vow. I was going to burn their entire kingdom to the ground. I barely slept that night. I stayed on the couch in my tiny apartment, staring at the ceiling, playing the audio recording over and over again until the words lost their meaning. The next morning, I dragged myself into the corporate office. I looked like a ghost. My eyes were swollen, my skin pale, and my hands couldn't stop trembling as I tried to type on my laptop. Around 10 a.m., my boss, Mr. Sterling, walked past my cubicle. He stopped, took one look at me, and said, "Charlotte, my office. Now." Mr. Sterling wasn't just a boss, he was a mentor. He was the one who pushed me to apply for the MBA. He knew my work ethic, and he knew something was catastrophically wrong. I walked into his spacious office, and he immediately closed the blinds and locked the door. "Sit down," he ordered gently. What happened? I tried to keep it professional. I tried to hold it together. But the moment I opened my mouth, the dam broke. I sobbed. I told him everything. I told him about Beatrice, the blatant favoritism, Grandma Eleanor's will, and the dinner confrontation. I told him how they stole the $120,000 and laughed in my face when I threatened legal action. Mr. Sterling leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. His expression shifted from sympathetic to a cold, hard corporate fury. Before he became a senior executive, Mr. Sterling had spent 10 years as a ruthless corporate litigator. "Charlotte," he said, his voice low and steady. "Look at me." I wiped my eyes and met his gaze. "This is not a family squabble. This is not a misunderstanding. This is a massive breach of fiduciary duty. It is theft. It is fraud. And depending on how they moved the money, it is a felony." Hearing someone else, a respected, powerful man, validate my reality felt like taking my first full breath of air in 24 hours. "They think I'm weak," I whispered. "They think I can't afford to fight them." Mr. Sterling reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a sleek, heavy business card. He slid it across the mahogany desk toward me. "This is about holding your parents accountable and respecting your grandmother's wishes, not just about money. The name on this card is an old friend of mine at one of the most aggressive estate litigation firms in the city. Call him. Tell him I sent you." I looked at the gold embossed lettering on the card. "But I can't afford their retainer," I admitted, the shame burning my cheeks. Mr. Sterling smiled grimly. "You won't have to. We are going to find someone who can." I left his office feeling something new. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a woman with a plan, and I knew exactly who to call to fund this war. I thought the worst was over. I was so incredibly wrong. As soon as I got to my car on my lunch break, I pulled up a contact in my phone I hadn't spoken to in 3 years, Uncle Arthur. Arthur was my father's older cousin. He was a self-made multimillionaire who owned a string of successful logistics companies. Growing up, he wasn't around much, mostly because he despised my parents. Uncle Arthur had always been a sharp, no-nonsense man who saw right through my father's country club facade and my mother's fake smiles. But whenever he did visit, he was the only family member who asked about my grades, who praised my hard work, and who treated me like a human being instead of an accessory. My hand shook as I dialed his number. He answered on the third ring. "Charlotte? To what do I owe the pleasure?" His deep, gravelly voice echoed through the speaker. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I laid it all out. I told him about the will, the stolen MBA fund, the house for Beatrice, and the exact words my father used when he kicked me out. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. When Uncle Arthur finally spoke, his voice was ice-cold, radiating a terrifying, controlled anger. "I always knew your parents played favorites," he said slowly. "I knew Richard was a pompous fool. But stealing a six-figure inheritance from their own daughter to fund that useless sister of yours? That crosses every line." "I have a lawyer recommended by my boss," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "But I don't have the capital to fight a protracted legal battle. They know that. That's why they laughed at me." "Let them laugh," Uncle Arthur growled. "Listen to me very carefully, Charlotte. You do not worry about the legal fees. I am handling everything. I'm blank checking this lawsuit. I am going to hire the best forensic accountants in the state. We are going to track down every single red cent they took from you." Tears of relief spilled down my cheeks. For the first time in my life, someone in my family was standing up for me. "Send me the lawyer's information," Arthur continued, his business instincts kicking in. "Go home tonight and back up every email, every text message, every scrap of communication you have with your parents and Beatrice. We are going to war, kid. And we are taking no prisoners." The next 2 weeks moved with terrifying speed. Uncle Arthur wasn't just making idle threats, he was a man of immense resources, and he unleashed them all. He retained the law firm Mr. Sterling recommended, paying an astronomical retainer up front. But more importantly, he hired an elite team of forensic accountants to tear into my parents' financial history. Because my parents were named custodians of the trust, the lawyers were able to force the bank to turn over the transaction logs. I sat in a sleek, glass-walled conference room high above the city with Uncle Arthur, my lead attorney, and the head forensic accountant, a quiet man named Davis. Davis hooked his laptop up to the projector. The screen lit up with spreadsheets and highlighted bank transfers. "Your parents were incredibly sloppy," Davis began, adjusting his glasses. "But what we found is far worse than a simple theft of the MBA fund." My stomach plummeted. "Worse how?" Davis clicked to the next slide. "We traced the initial down payment for Beatrice's house. It was indeed funded entirely by the $120,000 from your trust. They drained the account in 3 massive wire transfers over the last 6 months. So we have them dead to rights," Uncle Arthur said, leaning back in his leather chair. "Yes," Davis nodded. "But look at this timeline." He pointed a laser pointer at a series of dates. "These transfers from the trust happened recently. But the money shuffling? That started much earlier." He pulled up a new document. It was a power of attorney form. "Your parents had financial power of attorney over your grandmother Eleanor during the final year of her life when her health was declining," Davis explained, his tone completely flat. "We found evidence that they were methodically siphoning money from her personal savings accounts into private, hidden LLCs, months before she actually passed away." The room went dead silent. I felt the air get sucked out of my lungs. They didn't just steal my inheritance after Grandma died. My mother and father had been robbing a dying woman while she was lying in a hospital bed. They were plotting this heist, siphoning off her wealth to ensure Beatrice would be set for life, while I sat beside Grandma's bed, holding her hand, completely unaware that I was surrounded by vultures. "They didn't just commit fraud against you, Charlotte," my lawyer said softly. "They committed elder financial abuse. This isn't just a civil suit anymore. They are looking at massive criminal liability." I stared at the numbers on the screen. Any lingering guilt I had about suing my own parents evaporated instantly. The people who raised me were monsters hiding behind golf club memberships and luxury cars. "Good," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. I looked at Uncle Arthur, and for the first time I felt truly powerful. "Take everything they have." The legal machinery we unleashed did not just turn, it roared to life with terrifying efficiency. Before my parents could even comprehend the magnitude of the storm heading their way, they were served with a massive, multi-count civil lawsuit. Alongside it was a formal notice that my legal team was turning over our findings regarding my grandmother's accounts to the district attorney for potential criminal investigation. You would think that facing a potential felony would humble them. You would be wrong. Their arrogance was a deeply ingrained disease, and they genuinely believed they could charm their way out of a federal offense. Their lawyer, a man named Benson, requested a formal mediation session at his downtown office. He framed it as a family reconciliation meeting. I agreed to go, but purely because my legal team wanted to get my parents on the record in a controlled environment. I arrived early on a Tuesday morning and sat at the far end of a massive mahogany conference table. The room smelled of expensive espresso, leather, and old money. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, I watched my father pull his pristine silver Porsche Cayenne into the VIP parking spot below. They were 15 minutes late. When the heavy oak doors finally swung open, my parents walked in looking exactly as they always did. My mother, Evelyn, wore a tailored designer suit, her hair perfectly blown out, clutching a quilted Chanel handbag like it was a shield of armor. My father, Richard, adjusted his Rolex and carried himself with the bloated confidence of a man walking into a country club mixer. They didn't look like people facing a devastating lawsuit and absolute financial ruin. My father didn't even look at me when he entered. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, took a seat across the table, and immediately started speaking to my lawyer as if I was entirely invisible. "Look, we all know this has gotten entirely out of hand," he said, using his smooth, patronizing golfing buddy voice. "My daughter has always been a little high-strung. She is blowing a simple family financial arrangement vastly out of proportion. We are here to make this go away so we can all move on." My mother sighed dramatically, pulling a tissue from her purse to dab at completely dry eyes. "Charlotte, honey, you are breaking your mother's heart. How could you involve outside lawyers in our family matters? We are your flesh and blood. You are destroying this family over a simple misunderstanding about a college fund." I sat perfectly still. My hands were folded quietly in my lap. I didn't flinch, and I didn't speak. I just watched them perform their routine. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. They were trying to rewrite history in real time, relying on the old dynamic where I would eventually back down just to keep the peace at Thanksgiving dinners. "We want to put this ugly business behind us," my father continued, leaning forward with a patronizing smile. He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a leather-bound checkbook, and scrawled a number with a gold fountain pen. He tore the check out with a crisp snap and slid it across the polished wood table toward me. $10,000, he announced, acting as if he were bestowing a kingdom upon a peasant. "Take the 10 grand. It will cover your application fees and give you a nice little cushion for your living expenses. You have a great salary at your firm, Charlotte. You don't need a massive inheritance right now. Beatrice needed real estate equity to build her future. You drop the lawsuit today, and we can all go back to having a normal, happy family." I looked down at the piece of paper. $10,000. Less than 10% of what they stole from me. They were trying to buy their way out of a felony with pennies, expecting me to lick their boots for the privilege of receiving scraps. I felt a cold, hard knot of absolute resolve solidify in my chest. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply looked up, met my father's arrogant gaze, and let the silence stretch until the air in the room grew suffocatingly thick. I was waiting for my cue. The oppressive silence was suddenly broken by the heavy conference room door opening again. Uncle Arthur walked in, flanked by Davis, our lead forensic accountant. Uncle Arthur didn't wear designer suits to impress anyone. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored charcoal blazer, and he carried the terrifying aura of a man who built a multi-million-dollar empire from scratch. My father's confident smirk instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer confusion. "Arthur? What the hell are you doing here?" Uncle Arthur didn't answer him right away. He walked straight to the table, picked up the $10,000 check by the corner as if it were a piece of contaminated trash, and dropped it back in front of my father. I am funding this lawsuit, Richard, Uncle Arthur said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that commanded the attention of every single person in the room. And I am here to deliver a message from my legal team. There will be no negotiations. There will be no family discounts. You will either be charged with a crime, or you will return the entire $120,000, plus interest, plus all of Charlotte's legal fees, plus the cost of my forensic accounting team. My mother gasped, clutching her pearls in a rare moment of genuine, unscripted shock. Arthur, you can't do this. You're taking her side against your own family? You lost the right to use the word family the day you stole a dying woman's money to pamper your deadbeat oldest daughter, Uncle Arthur snapped back, the venom in his voice making my mother physically recoil into her chair. My father stood up, his face red with sudden rage and rising panic. This is extortion. We don't have that kind of liquid cash sitting around. We put it into Beatrice's house. Then you better start selling your assets, Richard, Uncle Arthur replied coldly, not backing down an inch. Because if you don't sign a settlement agreeing to full restitution today, we file the motion to freeze your bank accounts tomorrow morning. And I promise you, I have enough money to keep you tied up in a lawsuit until you are completely bankrupt. The reality of their situation finally set in. My parents' lawyer, Benson, who had been sitting quietly taking notes, suddenly looked incredibly uncomfortable. It was clear he hadn't been fully briefed by my parents on the extent of the forensic evidence we actually possessed. The meeting ended abruptly. My parents stormed out, terrified, furious, and humiliated. Within hours, my phone started blowing up. The onslaught of text messages and voicemails from my parents was relentless. They called me a traitor, a monster, a gold digger who was ruining their lives. I didn't answer a single one. I forwarded every single message directly to my legal team to build a rock-solid harassment file. But the fatal mistake came the next morning. Beatrice, realizing her dream home was suddenly in jeopardy because the stolen down payment was being tracked, sent me a frantic, rambling email. She tried to play the innocent victim, a role she had perfected over 35 years. Charlotte, she wrote, I swear I was completely clueless about the source of the house money. Mom and Dad said they had a 401k or some savings set aside for us. I never thought they would steal your inheritance. Please exercise some common sense and drop this. We can come up with a family solution later. Don't take my house away from me. I stared at the screen and almost laughed at the sheer audacity. I forwarded the email to Uncle Arthur. His reply came back 2 minutes later, send it to the lawyers immediately. She just proved she is aware the funds are stolen, and she is actively asking you to let her keep the money. She is officially complicit in the cover-up. The trap had snapped completely shut, and they had willingly locked themselves inside it. I thought the worst of the battle was over. I was so incredibly wrong. 3 weeks later, we found ourselves in a formal deposition room at the county courthouse. This was not a friendly mediation, this was the moment where sworn testimony was required under penalty of perjury. My father walked in, still desperately clinging to his haughty demeanor, adjusting his silk tie and glaring at me across the room. My parents were still trying to control the narrative. Their defense strategy was to assert that Grandma Eleanor's will was confusingly worded and that, as custodians, they had broad legal discretion to distribute the funds as they saw fit to support the immediate needs of the family. They thought it would be a game of their word against mine. But Uncle Arthur's legal team had prepared a masterstroke they never saw coming. The heavy wooden door opened, and a small, older woman walked in. She was wearing a simple floral dress and carrying a thick, worn leather-bound notebook. My parents looked at her, entirely confused. They had no idea who she was. But I recognized her instantly. It was Mrs. Higgins, the private caregiver who had tended to Grandma Eleanor around the clock in the final 6 months of her life. When our legal notice regarding the estate had gone public through the probate court, Mrs. Higgins had seen it in the local notices and immediately reached out to Uncle Arthur. Our lead attorney called her to the table. Mrs. Higgins, can you please state your name and identify the item in your hands for the record? My name is Martha Higgins, she said, her voice clear and steady. And this is my daily care diary. I am required by my nursing agency to document all patient interactions, medications, and visitors to ensure proper care. Could you please turn to the entry dated October 14th of the year Eleanor passed and read it for the record? My parents' lawyer, Mr. Benson, leaned forward, his brow deeply furrowed. He could sense an ambush. Mrs. Higgins opened the book, adjusted her reading glasses on the bridge of her nose, and began to read. Patient Eleanor had a visit from her son, Richard, and his wife, Evelyn. Eleanor became visibly distressed during the conversation. She explicitly told Richard, quote, "The money in the education trust is for Charlotte's MBA and nothing else. Do not touch it." Unquote. Richard became agitated and told her she was being paranoid. The patient required mild sedation after they left due to a dangerously elevated heart rate. The silence in the deposition room was absolute and deafening. My father's jaw literally dropped. The color drained entirely from my mother's face, leaving her looking pale and sickly. Mrs. Higgins continued, turning the pages of her diary. She read out 3 separate, distinct encounters where Grandma Eleanor explicitly warned my parents not to touch my college fund, and where my parents verbally acknowledged her strict instructions. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't confusing wording in a legal document. It was a calculated, deliberate defiance of a dying woman's wishes, captured perfectly in ink by an unbiased third party. Lawyer Benson, the man my parents had paid an exorbitant fee to defend them, slowly closed his notepad. He looked at my father, then at my mother, with a look of pure professional disgust. He had been completely blindsided. My parents had lied to their own attorney, hiding the fact that there were direct, credible witnesses to their fraudulent intent. "I need a recess," Benson said sharply. He stood up, motioned for my parents to follow him into the hallway, and shut the door firmly behind them. 10 minutes later, Benson returned to the room alone. He looked directly at the court reporter and stated, "I am formally withdrawing as counsel for the respondents, effective immediately. I cannot, and will not, represent clients who have knowingly misrepresented the material facts of their case." My parents were now legally defenseless, abandoned by their own counsel in the middle of a sworn deposition. Watching their smug facade crumble into pure terror was one of the most satisfying moments of my entire life. The final, fatal blow came during the official hearing in front of the judge the following week. My parents had scrambled in a blind panic to hire a new, third-rate lawyer who looked completely out of his depth and exhausted before the hearing even began. My team, however, was a well-oiled machine operating with lethal precision. When it was our turn to present our case, my lawyer didn't just walk the judge through the simple theft of the $120,000. He unveiled the full forensic accounting report. He set up massive, blown-up charts of my parents' bank statements for the entire courtroom to see. "Your Honor," my lawyer stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. This was not a crime of opportunity or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a premeditated, systematic draining of assets. He systematically showed the judge how my parents had utilized their power of attorney, months before my grandmother actually died, to move her personal savings into a joint account they secretly controlled. He showed the exact paper trail of the stolen MBA fund filtering through 3 different dummy accounts before finally landing in Beatrice's escrow account for the real estate purchase. And then came the twist that completely destroyed my sister's innocent, victimized facade. My lawyer produced a printed copy of Beatrice's frantic email. We also submit into evidence this written communication from Beatrice, the direct beneficiary of the stolen funds. While she claims ignorance of the origin, she explicitly asks the plaintiff to allow her to keep the stolen money to preserve her real estate transaction. She is a knowing recipient of illicit funds and an active participant in attempting to conceal the theft. The judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for nonsense in her courtroom, looked over the documents. She looked down at my parents from the bench. They were now physically trembling in their seats. My mother was silently weeping, her perfect Chanel facade completely shattered. My father kept his head bowed, unable to meet anyone's eye, thoroughly defeated. The behavior demonstrated by the respondents is a calculated betrayal of both their daughter and the dying wishes of their own mother, the judge said, her voice dripping with judicial contempt. I have rarely seen such a staggering degree of moral decay in a family unit. She didn't just rule in my favor. She dropped the hammer of justice with maximum force. She ordered my parents to return the full $120,000 immediately. But because of the proven malice, the premeditation, and the elder abuse implications, she invoked punitive damages. They were ordered to pay nearly double the original amount, plus every single dime of my legal and forensic accounting fees. Furthermore, the judge signed the motion to immediately freeze all of their assets to prevent them from attempting to hide any more cash. Everything they had worked so hard to project, the wealth, the status, the perfect family image, was violently ripped away in a matter of minutes. I sat there, listening to the gavel strike the sound block. I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. I just felt a profound, heavy sense of finality. The people who had tried to bury me were now buried under the crushing weight of their own greed. The fallout from the judge's ruling was rapid and utterly devastating. To satisfy the massive court-ordered judgment and the exorbitant legal fees, my parents had absolutely no choice but to liquidate their assets. The crown jewel of their fake wealth, the beautiful, sprawling suburban home they had inherited from my grandparents, had to be put on the market and sold at a heavy loss just to generate immediate cash. The day the moving trucks arrived at their house, I didn't go to watch, but Uncle Arthur made sure I knew all the pathetic details. They had to sell my father's precious Porsche Cayenne to a discount used car dealership. They downgraded from their affluent, manicured neighborhood to a cramped, two-bedroom rental apartment on the noisy, industrial outskirts of town. But the financial ruin was only half the punishment. The social execution was what truly broke their spirits. You see, in upper-middle-class suburban society, you can be a lot of things. You can be obnoxious, you can be cheap, and you can be annoying, but you absolutely cannot be a convicted thief who stole an inheritance from your own child. Word spread through their neighborhood and social circles like wildfire. Uncle Arthur ensured that a few key members of my father's country club received anonymous copies of the public court rulings. Within a week, my father was asked by the board of directors to quietly resign his membership from the golf club. His former corporate buddies, the men he used to smoke cigars and drink scotch with, suddenly stopped returning his calls. No one wants to do business or be associated with a man legally proven to have embezzled family funds. The public humiliation was too much. He was forced to take an early, severely reduced retirement from his firm because his professional reputation had become entirely radioactive. My mother suffered an identical, agonizing fate. The wealthy women in her elite bridge club, who she had spent decades gossiping with, held a special meeting and unanimously voted to remove her as their treasurer. She was quietly asked to step down from all her local charity boards. The ultimate blow came when their church, a congregation they had attended for 20 years to maintain their righteous, perfect image, asked them to step away from their leadership roles. They became absolute social pariahs, trapped in a tiny apartment, entirely isolated from the glamorous world they had sacrificed their own daughter to maintain. If my parents' fall from grace was a slow, agonizing burn, Beatrice's destruction was a sudden, violent explosion. The moment the court formally froze my parents' assets and declared the down payment on Beatrice's house as stolen property, the mortgage lender panicked. They immediately launched an internal fraud investigation. Because Beatrice and her fiancé, Nathan, had co-signed loan documents using money they now legally knew was stolen, the bank revoked their loan approval entirely. The real estate deal collapsed overnight, and they lost the dream house. But the nightmare didn't stop there. The scandal inevitably leaked to Beatrice's workplace. A prestigious private preschool does not want a kindergarten administrator who is publicly embroiled in a massive financial fraud lawsuit. The school board held an emergency meeting, citing ethical concerns and a severe loss of community trust, and Beatrice was unceremoniously fired from her job. The overwhelming stress cracked her relationship wide open. Nathan, realizing he was legally tethered to a woman whose family was profoundly toxic and facing complete ruin, packed his bags. He walked out, dodging a messy divorce and a potential future custody battle with a woman who had lied to him from the start. The wedding was permanently cancelled. In a desperate, pathetic attempt to save herself, Beatrice called me from a blocked number. She sobbed hysterically into the phone, begging me to call off the lawyers, begging me to give her some of the money back so she could just pay her rent. "You ruined my life, Charlotte," she wailed. "No, Beatrice," I replied, my voice steady, cold, and completely devoid of pity. "You ruined your own life the second you accepted money that had a dead woman's dying wish attached to it." I hung up the phone and permanently blocked her number. The final nail in the coffin was the extended family meeting. My parents tried to organize a gathering of the aunts and uncles to plead for loyalty and spin the narrative one last time. Uncle Arthur attended instead of me. He stood up in front of dozens of relatives, and he read the judge's ruling out loud. He exposed every single lie. My Aunt Clara, my mother's own sister who had always defended her, stood up, looked my parents dead in the eye, and said, "I don't even recognize who you are anymore. Do not ever call my house again." Uncle Arthur's ruthless plan had worked perfectly. They were left with absolutely nothing, and absolutely no one. In the quiet aftermath of the hurricane, I finally found myself standing in the sunlight. The full $120,000 college fund, plus the punitive damages and the reimbursement for all legal fees, were wired directly into a secure, private account solely under my name. But the money was just a tool. The real victory was the incredible life I built with it, far away from their toxicity. I applied to my dream MBA program, and not only was I accepted, but I was awarded a prestigious merit scholarship based on my exceptional corporate track record. I wouldn't even need to touch the bulk of Grandma's money to pay for my tuition. When I brought the official acceptance letter to my boss, Mr. Sterling, he beamed with genuine pride. He officially approved my leave of absence and handed me a signed contract. "Your handling of this incredibly difficult situation demonstrated that you possess the exact strength and judgment required for senior leadership," he told me. A massive promotion to the executive tier, complete with a six-figure salary increase, was waiting for me the day I graduated. Uncle Arthur stepped in to fill the massive void my father had left, becoming the true mentor and father figure I had always craved. He started teaching me about wealth management, helping me invest my recovered funds into robust real estate and stock portfolios. "Your grandmother would be incredibly proud of you, Charlotte," he told me over lunch one afternoon. "You've shown you have the absolute backbone for business. You protected your legacy, and you protected yourself." I used a portion of the settlement to permanently upgrade my living situation. I moved out of my cramped apartment and bought a beautiful, modern condo in a high-security gated community. The real estate was a solid financial investment, but more importantly, it offered unparalleled peace of mind. I gave the front gate guards photographs of my parents and Beatrice. The strict instructions were simple: under no circumstances were they ever allowed on the premises. Their phone numbers were blocked by my carrier. Their emails were routed directly to a junk folder that my lawyer reviewed once a month to monitor for any signs of harassment. I had built an impenetrable fortress around my hard-won peace. A few weeks ago, a mutual acquaintance from my old hometown reached out to me. They mentioned that they had seen my father sitting entirely alone at a cheap coffee shop near his new, run-down apartment. They said he looked aged, disheveled, and profoundly miserable, just staring blankly out the window for hours on end. They asked if I felt any guilt, or if I planned to ever speak to him or my mother again. I took a sip of my tea, looked out at the beautiful view from my new condo, and smiled. "No," I said. "People in our society often confuse forgiveness with reconciliation. Society constantly tells women that we must be the peacemakers, the healers, the ones who unconditionally absorb the blows just to keep the family together. But I learned the hard way that shared blood does not entitle anyone to abuse you. I forgive them, in the sense that I no longer carry the heavy, burning anger in my chest. I don't lay awake at night plotting revenge. I don't actively wish them harm. I just simply do not care if they exist. I think back to Grandma Eleanor's final words to me: education is the one thing nobody can ever take away from you. She was absolutely right. But the greatest education I received wasn't just found in textbooks, boardrooms, or MBA classrooms. It was the brutal, necessary education of learning my own intrinsic worth. I learned that my voice matters. I learned that setting an ironclad boundary and holding it without apology is an act of profound self-love. I survived the people who were supposed to love me the most, and I came out the other side utterly unbreakable. So, to anyone listening to this video who has ever been made to feel small, invisible, or burdensome by your own family, hear me right now. You are not a scapegoat. You are not a bank account to be drained. You are a human being deserving of respect and genuine love. Do not let toxic loyalty keep you chained to people who only value you for what they can extract from you. Stand up. Gather your evidence. And fight fiercely for the life you deserve. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to draw a hard line in the sand and walk away from toxic relatives to protect your peace and your future? Share your story in the comments below. We read every single one, and this community is here to support you. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey of healing and triumph. Until next time, stay strong and protect your peace.